The dust of ages settled over the ancient ruins, the remnants of a lost civilization that had been swallowed by time. Far beneath the surface of a remote Earth desert, a team of archaeologists was uncovering something that would shake the foundations of history. The area had been explored many times before, dismissed as nothing more than the site of a forgotten battle. But when Dr. Naomi Rivers, the lead archaeologist, stumbled upon the ornate stone tablet buried deep beneath layers of sand, everything changed. The tablet was inscribed with strange symbols, symbols that shouldn't have been possible on Earth, alien glyphs, the likes of which had never been seen in human history. As Naomi carefully brushed away the centuries-old debris, the tablet hummed with an almost imperceptible energy, sending a chill down her spine. This wasn't just a relic, it was a message. "Dr. Rivers, you need to see this," shouted one of her team members, a young, eager researcher named Cole. Naomi, her heart pounding, hurried over to where Cole was standing. He was crouched beside a half-buried chest, its surface weathered but adorned with intricate patterns, designs that mirrored those on the tablet. "It's him," Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. She had been studying the ancient Warlord legend for years, a myth that had been relegated to the darkest corners of historical research. According to the scattered fragments of ancient texts, the Warlord was Earth's greatest hero, a warrior whose might had saved the galaxy from an unstoppable ancient enemy. Yet, just as quickly as he appeared, he vanished from history, forgotten by all but the most fringe scholars, until now. As Naomi and her team carefully extracted the chest from its resting place, the air seemed to crackle with static. The relic inside was an intricately designed gauntlet, pulsating with energy as though it had a life of its own. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The stories were true. The Warlord had once existed, and his power was buried on Earth, waiting for someone to unlock it. Cole took a tentative step forward, reaching for the gauntlet, but Naomi stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't touch it," she warned. "There's something about this. It's not just an artifact. It's something more." Before she could explain further, a sudden explosion rocked the cavernous chamber, sending debris flying in every direction. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Naomi barely had time to react before the ceiling caved in, blocking the exit. The team scrambled for cover as the dust settled. Outside, a ship hovered above the ruins, sleek, dark, and unmistakably alien. Naomi's heart raced as the realization struck her like a thunderclap. They weren't alone. Someone else knew about the relic, and they would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. As the dust cleared, Naomi's mind flashed to something her grandmother had told her as a child. The Warlord was never truly gone, only waiting for the galaxy to need him once more. She had dismissed it as old stories, but now she understood the truth. The galaxy needed him, and soon Earth would too. Far from the chaos unfolding beneath the sands, Marcus Voss, a quiet man living in the heart of Earth's most mundane city, stirred in his sleep. For the first time in years, he dreamed of a war that spanned galaxies, of battles fought and victories won. His body trembled as the familiar feeling of combat surged through him, but it wasn't until the faintest whisper touched his mind. "It's time," that he awoke with a start. His pulse quickened as he struggled to shake the vivid images of his past. What was it? What did it mean? He had no answers. But something deep inside him knew that his life, and the fate of the universe, was about to change. The relic had been uncovered. The Warlord was stirring. Marcus Voss sat on the edge of his bed, drenched in sweat, his hands trembling. The dream had been more vivid than ever. Brutal battles fought under alien skies, his body wreathed in the power of an ancient armor. He'd have been someone else, someone mighty. The name that whispered in the corners of his mind, the Warlord, sent an inexplicable shiver down his spine. It was as if the name belonged to him, yet he knew it shouldn't. His memories were fractured, scattered like broken glass, and he could hardly piece them together. Shaking his head, Marcus stood, trying to dispel the haze of confusion that clung to him. He had been living a quiet, nondescript life for years. A mechanic in a small city on Earth, Marcus had chosen obscurity. He had turned his back on his past, whatever that past was, hoping that by burying it deep enough, it would stay gone. But the dreams, they were relentless, pulling him back into a reality he wasn't ready to confront. With a sigh, he walked to the small mirror above his desk, running a hand through his hair. The man in the reflection was unremarkable, a face weathered by time, but still youthful enough to be a distant echo of someone he no longer recognized. His blue eyes stared back at him, filled with a quiet uncertainty. Who was he really? Then the memory hit him like a tidal wave, sharp, clear, and undeniable. He saw it. A warship, colossal in size, drifting in the black void of space. He was aboard it, commanding it, leading armies across the stars. And in his hands was a weapon of unimaginable power, a weapon he had forged with his own hands, a weapon destined to stop an ancient galactic scourge. Marcus staggered back, gasping for air. The vision was gone as quickly as it came, leaving only a gnawing sense of loss, of something important slipping just beyond his reach. Was it real, or was it just a figment of his fragmented memories? Before he could process further, his phone buzzed, snapping him back to the present. He glanced at the screen and froze. A news alert flashed across the screen, a short headline that made his heart skip a beat. Archaeological discovery in Earth's desert. Ancient artifact unveiled. The accompanying image was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. What they had uncovered was unmistakably familiar. The artifact. It was the gauntlet. His gauntlet. His breath caught in his throat. The dreams, the visions, the nagging pull in the back of his mind. It was all connected. The artifact was awakening, and with it, his past. He had to go there. He didn't know why, but the compulsion was undeniable. Meanwhile, at the site of the discovery, Dr. Naomi Rivers was struggling to comprehend the situation. The team had barely escaped the collapse of the cavern when they were ambushed by the mysterious, heavily armed forces. They had taken the artifact, and Naomi had barely managed to escape with her life. She was now in hiding, her communications disabled, and she had no idea who or what was behind the attack. But one thing was clear: the forces that had come for the artifact were not of this world, and they were relentless. Naomi was no fool. She'd have been researching the legend of the Warlord for years, and it had never felt like a fairy tale. The sudden resurgence of interest in the relic confirmed what she had always suspected. The Warlord wasn't just a story. He was real, and whoever had triggered the artifact's activation was about to face an unimaginable force. The Warlord was coming, but who would wield his power? Back on Earth, Marcus was already in motion. He didn't know why he was so sure, but he knew he had to find the relic. Somehow, he could feel its presence calling to him. As the pieces of his forgotten past began to align, Marcus knew one thing for certain: his life as he knew it was over. The galaxy was in danger, and he was its last hope. He just hoped he was ready for what was about to come. Marcus had barely packed his things when the first hint of urgency pulsed through him. It was as though the gauntlet was calling, whispering directly to him through the ether of his mind, pulling him towards something far larger than himself. He had no idea how he knew, but he could feel it, the way the universe was shifting around him, urging him to act. The flight to the desert was a blur. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Why him? Why now? Why did the gauntlet feel so familiar, as though it had always belonged to him? Every step of the journey felt like a step toward a destiny he wasn't sure he was ready for. But the weight of it pressed down on him, and with each passing moment, the clarity grew stronger. This wasn't a coincidence. This was fate. By the time Marcus arrived at the site, the remnants of the cave-in were still smouldering. The area was cordoned off, military personnel standing guard, but they were too distracted by the chaos to notice him slipping past the perimeter. He had no clear plan, but that didn't matter. His instincts, those buried memories, knew exactly where to go. As he approached the ruins, a familiar sensation washed over him. The air shimmered with a strange energy, as if the very fabric of the desert was vibrating in sync with his heartbeat. The relic was close. He could almost see it. He pushed forward, his legs carrying him faster than he ever thought possible. Inside the cavern, the remnants of Dr. Rivers' team were still in disarray, a few scattered researchers trying to dig through the rubble to recover their findings. But Naomi was nowhere in sight. Then Marcus saw it, the gauntlet, partially buried in the debris, still glowing faintly with the strange energy that had begun to haunt his dreams. His pulse quickened. He was so close to unlocking the mystery of his past, to understanding the power that had once been his. He reached for it. The moment his hand brushed the surface, a surge of energy shot through him, like an electric shock to his core. His body stiffened, and memories that had been buried for years surged to the surface. He was on a starship, his hands gripping the control panel as battle raged around him. The galaxy was at war, and he was leading humanity's defense against an unstoppable force. His name was known throughout the galaxy, Marcus Voss, the Warlord, Earth's champion. He was a symbol of hope, a leader who had united fractured civilizations. The gauntlet was more than just a weapon. It was a conduit for his power, amplifying his strength and his resolve to protect all that he loved. The memories flooded him so fast that he almost couldn't keep up. His mind reeled, trying to process the information. But he knew one thing. This was his destiny, and it was time to embrace it. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was the Warlord, and his people needed him. The sound of footsteps pulled him back to the present. He turned just in time to see Naomi Rivers standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock and recognition. She had been watching him from a distance, her every instinct telling her that Marcus was not just another man stumbling into the story. He was the key to everything. "You," Naomi began, her voice thick with disbelief. "You're him, aren't you? The Warlord." Marcus stared at her, his thoughts still a whirlwind. I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "I think I am, but I don't remember. Not all of it." Naomi's eyes softened with understanding. "You've been chosen, Marcus. The Warlord's power has returned, and with it, the galaxy is in danger. We need you." Just then, a crackling voice echoed over the comms. "Dr. Rivers, we've lost contact with the retrieval team. The artifact is gone. We have to get out of here. Now." Naomi's face hardened. "We don't have time. The gauntlet is part of something far bigger, something that's been dormant for too long. And now it's awakened." Marcus clenched his fists, the gauntlet seeming to pulse with power. The time for waiting was over. The galaxy needed a champion, and Marcus Voss was about to answer the call. The hum of energy reverberated through the cavern, amplifying the strange connection Marcus felt to the gauntlet. It was as if the very air around him was charged with the pulse of an ancient power, a power that had once been his to wield. But now it felt foreign, untamed, like a storm waiting to break. Naomi's eyes locked onto his, and she could see the conflict in his gaze. She had seen it before, in the eyes of those who were called to greatness, but hesitated, unsure of their worth. But there was no time for hesitation now. "We don't have a choice, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "The forces that want the gauntlet aren't just after an artifact. They're after a weapon capable of reshaping the galaxy." Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the gauntlet's power thrumming beneath his skin. He had no idea what it was capable of, but something told him it wasn't just a symbol of his past, it was his future, and it was calling to him, beckoning him to reclaim what was lost. "I'm not ready," Marcus muttered, his voice thick with doubt. "I don't even know who I really am anymore." Naomi stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are Marcus Voss, the Warlord. You don't remember everything, but you are not alone in this. We'll help you." Just as the words left her lips, a series of explosions rocked the cavern, sending tremors through the ground. The walls cracked, and dust poured from the ceiling. Naomi's eyes widened in realization. They found us. Marcus could feel the shift in the air, the undeniable presence of a threat closing in. His instincts, sharpened by years of combat, kicked in. He stepped back, instinctively bringing his hands to the gauntlet. The energy it radiated seemed to flare in response, as if it had recognized his resolve. Outside the cavern, the distant sound of engines roared to life, followed by the unmistakable whine of weapons charging. The enemy was here. "We need to move," Marcus said, his voice cold with determination. His mind was already processing the situation, the way his body seemed to instinctively know what to do. He'd have fought wars like this before, only this time, the enemy wasn't just a force of nature. It was a force with a purpose, and they were after something far more dangerous than just Earth. Naomi nodded, her face a mask of grim resolve. "Follow me. I know a way out." As they navigated the labyrinth of tunnels, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. He could hear the faintest whisper of movement in the distance, the sound of boots on stone, the echo of someone, or something, tracking them. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Naomi stopped suddenly, pressing a finger to her lips. Quiet. They waited in the darkness, holding their breath as the enemy forces drew closer. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, but still, they remained hidden, their forms swallowed by the shadows. Then, just as the footsteps were about to round the corner, Marcus felt the gauntlet surge with power. His heart raced as the gauntlet's energy flooded through him, sharpening his senses, heightening his awareness. Without thinking, Marcus raised his arm, the gauntlet flaring with energy. The power surged outward, blasting a shockwave that sent the approaching enemies flying back into the cavern walls. The impact was brutal, knocking them unconscious in an instant. Naomi stared at him, wide-eyed, as the gauntlet's energy seemed to calm, fading back into a steady hum. That was... She breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. What just happened? Marcus looked at his hands, his heart still racing. "I didn't do that. It just happened." Naomi swallowed, her eyes narrowing. The gauntlet. It's more than just a weapon. It's a connection to your past, to the power you once had. The distant rumble of engines echoed through the tunnels once more, louder this time. Their pursuers weren't far behind. "We don't have much time," Marcus said, his voice steady now, as the remnants of his doubt began to fade. The memories, the instincts, were coming back to him faster than he could process. But he didn't need to understand everything. He just needed to act. Together, Marcus and Naomi pushed forward, determined to escape the cavern before the full force of the enemy descended upon them. And in the back of his mind, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The gauntlet had awakened, and so had he. But what lay ahead was far more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. The galaxy was on the edge of war, and Earth's champion had just returned to lead it. The narrow tunnels seemed to stretch forever as Marcus and Naomi pushed forward, the urgency of their escape growing with each passing moment. The blast from the gauntlet had bought them only a brief reprieve, and now the sounds of enemy soldiers closing in were impossible to ignore. Their footsteps echoed down the stone passageways, and Marcus could feel the weight of the approaching threat bearing down on them. Naomi's pace quickened, and Marcus instinctively matched it. She knew the way, and that gave him a sense of purpose, a thread of hope in the chaos of the unknown. But every instinct within him screamed that this was only the beginning. There was something far darker at play here, something more than just a group of armed men trying to seize a powerful artifact. As they rounded another corner, Naomi's hand shot out, signaling for Marcus to stop. She crouched low, listening intently. Marcus followed suit, his breath shallow as he strained to hear anything out of the ordinary. The air felt heavier here, the hairs on his neck standing on end, as though something was lurking just beyond his vision. "They're close," Naomi whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows ahead. Too close. Marcus glanced down at the gauntlet, now glowing with a steady, eerie light. It was as if it could sense their danger, like it was alive, pulsing with an energy that both repelled and beckoned him. The gauntlet wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon, an anchor to something far greater than Marcus could yet understand. Just then, a sharp, commanding voice broke the silence. "Find them." Marcus stiffened. He recognized the voice. It was harsh, cold, with an almost mechanical edge to it. The voice of someone who didn't care about the cost of failure. The voice of someone in charge. Naomi's expression darkened. "Commander Kor." "Who is that?" Marcus whispered, his voice tense. Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, she motioned for him to stay still. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Marcus saw a flicker of something personal, something she hadn't shared. She held up a hand, signaling for him to listen. The sounds of the enemy forces grew louder, and then, through the shadows, Marcus saw them. A squad of heavily armored soldiers, moving with purpose. But it wasn't just the soldiers that caught his attention. It was their leader, striding with terrifying confidence. Commander Kor was tall, clad in black armor that absorbed the light around him, making him appear like a shadow. His helmet was adorned with a single red line, and his eyes, visible through the slit in the mask, gleamed with cold calculation. Marcus could feel his gaze, as though Kor was already aware of their presence. "He's not just after the gauntlet," Naomi said, her voice low. "He's after the power it represents, and he'll stop at nothing to take it from us." Marcus clenched his fists. He'd have been waiting for this moment, waiting for the confrontation he knew was coming. But now, facing the man who had no qualms about enslaving humanity for his own gains, the stakes had never been clear. "We need to stop him," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "He's a threat to everything." Naomi nodded, her face grim. "He's part of a larger network. Kor works for the Syndicate, an organization that's been pulling the strings in the shadows for years. They're not just after Earth. They want the galaxy." Marcus felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had no memory of the Syndicate, but the weight of their ambitions was unmistakable. The gauntlet, it seemed, wasn't just a tool. It was the key to something far greater, and Kor wasn't the only one who wanted it. "We can't let him take it," Marcus said, his voice growing firmer. "We have to stop him now, before it's too late." Naomi's eyes hardened with resolve. "Then we fight." She moved first, darting down the side passage, her movements fluid and silent. Marcus followed, his instincts guiding him. As they approached the enemy squad, he felt the gauntlet flare with power once more, almost as if it recognized the threat. It was time to test its full potential. Without warning, Marcus raised his hand, and the gauntlet surged with energy. A shockwave rippled out, striking the soldiers with brutal force. The blast sent them sprawling, their armor crumpling under the impact. But Kor, ever the strategist, was already moving, ducking behind cover and ordering his men to regroup. "You think you can stop us?" Kor's voice boomed, full of scorn. "You are nothing but relics of a forgotten time." Marcus felt the weight of his words, but his resolve only strengthened. This was his moment. The Warlord's power surged through him, and he was ready to show Kor exactly what humanity was capable of. "Not a relic," Marcus muttered, his eyes hardening. "A champion." The cavern shook as the shockwave from Marcus's gauntlet reverberated through the stone walls. The enemy soldiers scrambled to recover, but their disarray was short-lived. They regrouped quickly, forming a tight formation, their weapons aimed at the two intruders. But Marcus was ready. Every pulse of energy from the gauntlet felt like it was syncing with his heartbeat, as though he were becoming one with the ancient power it contained. Naomi took position beside him, her eyes locked on the enemy forces. "We can't let them regroup," she said, her voice low and steady. "We've got one shot at this." Marcus nodded, the fire in his chest igniting. His fingers tightened around the gauntlet's intricate surface, feeling the weight of its power. He'd have been reluctant to use it, uncertain of what it was capable of. But now, with Kor's army closing in and Earth's future at stake, he knew that the time for hesitation was over. Kor's voice rang out from the shadows, his tone dripping with disdain. "You don't even remember who you are, do you, Warlord?" he called. "You were a tool, a weapon to be used by those smarter than you. You were never meant to be anything more than a puppet." The words stung, but Marcus's resolve only hardened. He wasn't the man he used to be, but neither was he the puppet Kor thought he was. He was the Warlord and Earth's last hope. "Naomi," Marcus said, his voice steady, "cover me." Without waiting for a response, he stepped forward, raising his arm as the gauntlet pulsed with untapped energy. The air crackled with anticipation, the ancient power seemingly recognizing its rightful master. Kor's soldiers hesitated for only a moment before opening fire. Blasts of energy shot toward Marcus, but he was faster. In an instant, he activated the gauntlet, and a shield of blue light exploded outward, deflecting the incoming fire. The soldiers' shots ricocheted harmlessly off the shield, creating a bright, disorienting flurry of sparks. Impressive. Kor's voice purred from behind cover. "But it won't save you." Marcus's eyes narrowed. The gauntlet surged once more, and with a single motion, he hurled the shield forward, sending it careening through the enemy ranks. The soldiers were thrown back by the impact, their armor shattering upon contact with the force of the blow. Marcus felt the pulse of the gauntlet's energy ripple through him, a rush of power he had never known. It was like a dam had broken, and the flood of memories and instincts that had been dormant for so long flooded his mind. The battle was no longer just a physical fight. It was a war of wills, and Marcus was beginning to understand that the gauntlet was more than just a weapon. It was a conduit for something greater, a force that would shape the galaxy's future. Kor emerged from his cover, his black armor gleaming in the dim light. "You think you can wield that power? You are nothing without the Syndicate's guidance, nothing but a relic of the past. Marcus's gaze locked onto Kor, and something deep inside him stirred, an ancient fury, a call to action that he could no longer ignore. The gauntlet flared once more, its power surging like a tidal wave ready to consume everything in its path. "You may have forgotten your place, Kor," Marcus said, his voice hard with conviction. "But I haven't." In an instant, he closed the distance between them, his gauntlet glowing brighter with every step. Kor raised his weapon, a dark, sleek energy rifle, aiming it at Marcus's chest. But before he could fire, Marcus unleashed the full power of the gauntlet in a focused blast. The energy slammed into Kor's rifle, sending a shockwave that left him staggered, his weapon disintegrating in his hands. "You're nothing without your toys," Marcus spat, his eyes burning with the rage of 100 forgotten battles. "Now it's just you and me." Kor sneered, but his defiance wavered as the full weight of Marcus's presence bore down on him. The Warlord had returned, and with him, an unstoppable fury. Kor's soldiers hesitated, clearly intimidated by the raw power now radiating from Marcus. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like himself again, unstoppable, undefeatable. His memories began to flood back, the wars he had fought, the empires he had shattered, and the promises he had made to protect humanity. Kor and his syndicate were nothing more than an obstacle in his path. "Give up, Marcus," Kor hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You can't win this." Marcus's lips curled into a fierce grin. "I already have." With a final surge of energy, he lunged at Kor, and the gauntlet's power erupted, a wave of unstoppable force that would change the course of the battle forever. The battlefield was quiet, save for the faint hum of the energy fluctuations surrounding Marcus. The echoes of the clash reverberated through the cavern walls, a stark reminder of the power that had just been unleashed. Kor staggered back, his black armor scorched and cracked from the overwhelming blast. His face, visible beneath the helmet, was twisted in disbelief and rage. You are nothing." Kor spat, his voice seething with contempt, as he wiped the blood from his mouth. "I've fought armies. I've destroyed planets. You think this relic can stop me?" Marcus stood tall, unyielding, the gauntlet still pulsing with energy. It felt as though it were alive in his hand, thrumming with the power of countless battles fought long before his time. The memories were becoming clearer now, the strategy, the precision, the destruction. This was more than a weapon. It was a piece of a long-forgotten war, a key to something far larger than Kor could comprehend. "You're wrong," Marcus said coldly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of lost time. "I'm not a relic. I'm your reckoning." With those words, Marcus advanced, his every movement fueled by the gauntlet's power and the burning desire to protect Earth. Kor, now backed into a corner, hesitated for only a moment before raising his own weapon, a sleek, black energy blade that hummed menacingly as he activated it. "You think I fear you?" Kor snarled, brandishing the weapon. "This blade has slain gods." Marcus's eyes narrowed as Kor lunged forward, the blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. But Marcus was faster. He raised his hand, the gauntlet glowing brighter, and a powerful shockwave emanated from it, sending Kor crashing into the stone wall. The energy pulse left deep cracks in the rock, and for a moment the cavern trembled, as if the very foundations of the planet were protesting the fury unleashed within. Kor recovered quickly, rolling to his feet with a growl. His eyes burned with hatred, and his energy blade crackled with renewed power. "You will regret underestimating me, Warlord." Marcus didn't flinch. He had seen warriors like Kor before, men who relied on weapons and arrogance to define their strength. But Marcus wasn't just a man. He was a force, an embodiment of something much greater, and the gauntlet was his conduit. He struck first this time, his gauntlet glowing with blinding intensity. A pulse of raw energy shot forward, striking Kor's energy blade and forcing the weapon from his hands. The blast disintegrated Kor's armor, sending him reeling back, but he didn't go down. He stood tall, his body cracking with energy, as if his rage alone could fuel his defiance. "You can't stop the Syndicate," Kor gritted through clenched teeth. "You think you're the only one with power. The only one who can control the galaxy's fate." Marcus took another step forward, his eyes cold with resolve. "You were never in control. The Syndicate is nothing but a shadow, and shadows fade in the light." Kor's expression darkened, but something shifted behind his eyes. Fear. He knew it, even if he wouldn't admit it. The true extent of Marcus's power was beyond his understanding, and that terrified him. But Kor wasn't one to back down easily. With a shout, he unleashed a devastating energy blast from his chest, a wave of destructive force that threatened to obliterate everything in its path. The energy surged toward Marcus like a tidal wave, faster than he could react. In that instant, Marcus raised his arm, and the gauntlet flared with a brilliance that illuminated the entire cavern. The blast collided with the shield created by the gauntlet, and for a brief moment, the two forces clashed in a violent struggle of energy and will. The air crackled with power, and Marcus felt the weight of it bearing down on him. Then, with a roar, he channeled all of his strength into the gauntlet, redirecting the energy back toward Kor. The blast slammed into him with the force of 1,000 storms, sending him hurtling across the cavern like a ragdoll. Kor hit the wall hard, and the ground beneath him cracked, crumbling under the force of the impact. Silence followed. Marcus lowered his arm, the gauntlet's energy slowly fading, but the power still thrummed beneath his skin. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the shattered stone, and approached Kor, who now lay on the ground, struggling to rise. "You were never going to win," Marcus said, his voice low but full of certainty. "Not while Earth still has something worth fighting for." Kor's face twisted in agony and fury, his body battered but not broken. "You think you've won," he gasped, blood dripping from his mouth. "The Syndicate will rise again. We are everywhere." Marcus knelt beside him, his eyes piercing into Kor's. "Not anymore. You're finished." With a final decisive motion, Marcus brought his fist down on Kor's chest, and the Syndicate commander's life was extinguished in an instant. The cavern was still. The threat had been neutralized, but the war was far from over. The silence in the cavern was deafening. Marcus stood over Kor's fallen form, the weight of the battle heavy in the air. The gauntlet still pulsed with a faint light, its power subdued but present. The storm that had raged inside Marcus was beginning to settle, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose. Earth had been saved, but the cost of this victory weighed on him heavily. The Syndicate was not the only threat that humanity faced. This was only the beginning. Naomi approached, her boots crunching on the cracked stone beneath her. She had been watching, waiting for the right moment to move, but now that the battle was over, she could see the toll it had taken on Marcus. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. "You did it," Naomi said quietly, her voice filled with admiration and concern. "Earth is safe." Marcus looked down at the gauntlet, his fingers tracing its intricate designs. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "But we're not finished. This is just one battle in a much larger war." Naomi's expression hardened, her gaze shifting toward the entrance of the cavern where the faint sound of distant engines could be heard. The Syndicate won't stop. They'll rebuild, regroup. They have resources, people. I know, Marcus replied. But they've underestimated something crucial. They think they're in control, that they can manipulate the galaxy to suit their needs. What they don't understand is that humanity has the power to shape its own destiny. We won't let them continue their reign of terror. His words were not just a promise, they were a declaration. He had reclaimed his place as Earth's champion, but the role he now played was larger than he ever could have imagined. The gauntlet was more than just a weapon, it was a symbol of humanity's strength, its resilience, and its ability to rise above those who sought to crush it. We need to prepare, Marcus continued, his voice resolute. The Syndicate may be down, but they won't be out for long. We need to unite the factions, build alliances, and stand together. Earth will lead, but we won't stand alone. Naomi nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. I'll rally the forces. We'll need everything we can get. As they turned to leave the cavern, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. Marcus tensed, instinctively reaching for the gauntlet, but Naomi held up a hand to stop him. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, one they both knew all too well. General Lyra Kane, the leader of the Earth Defense Coalition, stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Behind her, several other high-ranking officers and commanders of the Coalition's forces emerged. Marcus, Lyra said, her voice calm but authoritative. We've been watching your progress. The Syndicate is gone, but there are many who still doubt Earth's ability to lead the galaxy. Marcus studied her for a moment. Lyra Kane was known for her strategic mind and no-nonsense demeanor. She was also one of the few people who had always believed in Marcus's potential, even when he had doubted himself. We're not just trying to lead the galaxy, Lyra, Marcus replied, his gaze steady. We're trying to save it. The Syndicate may have fallen, but we've seen what they're capable of. The galaxy is fractured, and it needs a unifying force. Earth can be that force, but we need to show the galaxy that we're not just fighting for survival, we are fighting for a future. Lyra's lips curled into a slight smile. That's what I wanted to hear. We've had our differences in the past, Marcus, but I believe in this. I believe in you. The others behind her nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of determination and respect. Then we have work to do, Marcus said, his voice steady. Let's build the future we know humanity deserves. As they made their way out of the cavern, the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a golden light across the land. The war was not over, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The fight for Earth's future was just beginning, and he was ready to lead. But this time, he would not fight alone. The final battle had been won, but Marcus's journey was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with challenges and dangers, but Earth's champion had risen from the shadows, and with the strength of humanity behind him, there was no force in the galaxy that could stop them. The future had been secured. The war for humanity's survival had just begun.